Okay, Ellen, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Coalition on Human Needs webinar on the Biden-Harris American Rescue Plan. I'm Ellen Teller, chair of the CHN board and director of government affairs at the Food Research and Action Center, FRAC. The administration has proposed a $1.9 trillion plan to get the country back on track as we heal from the devastation caused by the pandemic. The American Rescue Plan supports COVID vaccines and healthcare, cuts child poverty in half, helps the unemployed, provides desperately needed nutrition aid, housing assistance, one-time stimulus payments, childcare, and paid leave, supports education and other state and local services, and so much more. Today, you'll hear from Jared Bernstein, a member of President Biden's White House Council on Economic Advisors, about how the COVID relief legislation now moving through Congress is the right size with the right policies to get us on the road to economic and overall pandemic recovery. You'll also hear a conversation with two leading DC pediatricians, Dr. Anna Kaskin and Lonray Falusi, both of whom will share the very real impacts that the pandemic has had on children and families. And we'll close with a Capitol Hill update and action steps you need to take, provided by CHN's Executive Director, Deborah Weinstein. As a reminder, this webinar is captioned. To enable closed captions, press the CC button on the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, and we hope you will populate our Q&A box with questions, just do so on your screen. There will also be a survey at the end of the webinar, which will pop up in your browser as you exit. Please fill it out so we can continue to improve our webinars. And finally, special thanks go out to our generous funders, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the George Gund Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and CHN members and supporters like you. Leading off our webinar is Jared Bernstein. Jared is a familiar face to CHN and past webinar participants. And as a double bass player, he can appreciate the analogy that the band is back together again. Jared is a member of President Biden's White House Council of Economic Advisors. He was a senior fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Prior to CBPP, he was chief economist and economic advisor to then Vice President Biden. Many of us worked with Jared going back to his days at EPI and on the CHN board. As always, we are delighted to have you, Jared, join us today. Our other speakers include Dr. Anna Walker Kaskin. Dr. Kaskin is the Associate Medical Director for Community Pediatrics at MedStar Georgetown University Hospital. In that role, she serves as the Director of Strategy for School Health and is the Medical Director of the School Health Center at Anacostia Senior High School. She is Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at Georgetown University School of Medicine and Deputy Medical Director of Georgetown University's Health Justice Alliance. She lectures widely on social determinants of health, health justice, medical legal partnerships, and transition to adult care. Dr. Lonray Falusi. Dr. Falusi is a pediatrician at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C., where she serves as the Medical Director of Advocacy Education in the Child Health Advocacy Institute. She has practiced primary care pediatrics for nearly 15 years in health centers serving families from African American and immigrant backgrounds. She is past president of the DC chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, a CHN member. Dr. Falusi often speaks on the topics of immigrant health, health equity, nutrition, and child poverty, and she regularly provides legislative testimony to promote child health and well-being. And finally, our cleanup hitter for today is Deb Weinstein. Deb came to CHN as its executive director in 2003. Boy, has time flown. In her 4 decades of advocacy experience, Debbie has worked on a wide range of issues at both the state and federal level. Prior to coming to CHN, she was director of the Family Income Division at the Children's Defense Fund, also a CHN member. At CDF, she worked on policy strategies to lift children and their families out of poverty, including TANF, child support, jobs and wages, housing, nutrition, unemployment insurance, and equitable tax policy. Sounds like the portfolio of your typical Hill staffer. So with that, I'm going to start with Jared Bernstein, and I hope everyone, as Jared speaks, will populate questions in the Q&A button on your screen. Jared, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with old friends and new. Debbie, Ellen, I'm not even going to think about how far back we go. we know those numbers, big numbers. Doctors Kaskin and Falusi, thank you so much for being here. And I kind of just want to get out of the way and listen to you, but everybody wants me to say a few words, so I guess I have to. And in fact, I want to, because I am very excited about the American Rescue Plan and the importance of this legislation for helping some of our most vulnerable people and communities finally get to the other side of this crisis with the help that they desperately need and that heretofore has yet to as fulsomely reach them as this president believes is needed. I want to start with a couple of comments about the economic rationale. I probably don't need to tell the folks on this call that the pandemic still weighs heavily on the US economy, specifically on groups most exposed to both the health and the economic hardships, the dual crises caused by the pandemic. And I will be talking throughout my brief comments on this aspect of the pandemic's impact on the economy. That is, it has not affected everybody in the same way. You'll hear people talk about a K-shaped recovery, meaning that those who never missed a paycheck, perhaps people who are invested in the stock market, are doing fine. I mean, in stark contrast to those on the other leg of the K, the downward leg of the K, who have borne the brunt of the hardship that I'm going to be talking about, and to whom so many of these programs, and Ellen ticked off a few of them, are dedicated. So in that sense, the rescue plan is intended to help people in communities who have been hardest hit get to the other side of the crisis. That's the rescue plan. Following that is a recovery plan that is far more embryonic at this point, but this plan is also important and is crafted to attack some of the structural inequities, some of the racial inequities in areas of care, childcare, elder care, clean energy, manufacturing, education, and importantly, racial justice. So let me start a little bit with just up-to-the-minute economic context. And by up to the minute, I mean this morning, where we learned that unemployment insurance claims came in at about 860,000 in the week that ended February 13th, last week. Just so we have some context there, that's well over 600,000 more than the average weekly claims before the crisis. So typically, if you follow that sort of thing, you might get an unemployment claims over a given week of 200 or 250,000. This is the 48th consecutive week that initial claims have exceeded these, even the highest kinds of numbers we had pre-pandemic. So I'm here to tell you that the job market still has very significant pockets of slack that disproportionately are difficult for those who are, in many cases, most economically vulnerable. Employment growth has actually stalled over the last few months after growing quickly initially. And I think the reason for that is very important and related to the urgency of the American Rescue Plan. One of the problems we've had is that Congress has responded, and Debbie and Ellen will know about this in detail, has responded to the crisis with various fiscal packages thus far. But we've had these air pockets, these kinds of wait and see episodes where for months Congress failed to act with the urgency necessary to deal COVID-19, the knockout blow that's yet to occur. The American Rescue Plan is designed precisely with that kind of goal in mind. That is, it recognizes that if we're going to get to the other side of the crisis, what we have to do first is control the virus and produce the vaccine and get shots in arms. And again, I know there are a couple of MDs on the panel who will probably go into more details on this. But I want to be very clear that we don't get to a robust, inclusive, racially equitable recovery until we take these steps to deal with the virus. So how does the ARP go about this? Well, it has more policies and parts than I want to get into right now, because if I start just ticking off a menu, that will be kind of, that won't be the most interesting way to talk about it. So what I want to try to do is just talk about some of the broad components and give you a few key examples, and then take some of your questions. Maybe one of the most important things to start out with is that after the virus control, which I'm going to get to, is the household income supports. So as a result of the pandemic, over half of households with incomes below 75,000 reported losses in household income. That was a much larger share, almost twice as much as those with incomes at the higher end. So we not only have to provide relief, we have to make sure it's targeted to those who've been hurt. That's not just folks at the bottom of the scale, that's folks in the middle as well. So direct payments, or checks as they've been often called, of $1,400 per person is something that the president has been pushing very hard for, working very hard to make sure that gets over the legislative goal line. And that links up to the $600 checks from December, such that you've heard people talk about 2,000. And those checks go to folks with incomes at various levels, both at the bottom, the middle, and they starting to phase out north of 150,000 for married couples who file jointly. Unemployment insurance benefits are enhanced in this plan. That is, the benefits themselves have an enhancement, increasing the current $300 per week that's was in the December plan to $400 per week, and the benefits and the length at which people can get benefits is also extended. The duration, the rescue plan offers longer durations extended to September as opposed to March, which is when the December plan ends. Of course, the increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour phased in over a number of years is another part of the plan that you've probably been hearing about. I think one thing that's talked about less, I'll get into some of the other income supports in a minute, but I was emphasizing the importance of not just controlling the virus and distributing the vaccine, but making sure that we reach those who've been left behind in this regard. So the rescue plan invests $20 billion for a national vaccination program, partnering with states, localities, tribes, territories. It has $50 billion in expanded testing. That includes purchasing rapid tests. It invests in broader capacity expansion for not just labs, but for schools, and helps local governments implement testing protocols. It invests to mobilize over 100,000 public health workers to better support the COVID response, including testing and tracing. It provides additional funding to community health centers, health services on tribal lands. These are, again, ways to get treatment, testing, virus, and vaccine to communities that have been left behind. The long-term care workforce will be disproportionately comprised of African American and Latino women, and this rescue plan provides funding for states to support and protect long-term care facilities. There's a set of housing policies that I think are especially important. I'll say one thing about that. I suspect people on the call, especially if they deal with housing, are familiar with both the mortgage forbearance and the rental or eviction forbearance kinds of programs that have been in play. These are very important to keep people from losing the roof over their heads when they've had their economic life disrupted by the pandemic and the labor market problems I was talking about earlier. But forbearance is not forgiveness. And in these cases, many people face significant bills coming due after these forbearance and eviction moratoria expire. By the way, the rescue plan does extend those moratoria, and that's really important, but at some point they'll come to an end. So there's 25 billion for rental assistance and 5 billion for utilities to help people make those debts when they come due. Since Ellen Teller's here, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the direct nutritional assistance or SNAP improvements, including a 15% benefit increase extended through September to help reduce the food insecurity that people have been hearing about. In fact, I think this is one of the best ways to understand the K-shaped dimensions of this recovery. You have a stock market that's going up, and if you read the financial pages, you'll hear all kinds of excitement about the trends in the stock market. At the same time that we know we have food banks with cars wrapping around block after block, tremendous demand for nutritional assistance. So if you think of those kinds of two very disparate, I think, trends, you'll understand this K-shaped recovery. Also in the direct nutritional assistance space, 3 billion in the plan for WIC, or women's, infants, and children, to help them get food they need, as well as help for temporary assistance to needy families, and for U.S. territories that have also required this kind of assistance. Two more points and then I'll stop. I think that something Ellen mentioned is something that many of us have been working on for a long time. It was mentioned that I worked at the Center for the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities, and one of the things we paid a lot of attention to there is the importance of refundable credits. And the child tax credit is a credit to help families with kids, low-income families with kids, because we know how important that is, and I suspect our MD friends will speak about this. We know how important it is for families to have this kind of, for low-income families, poor families, to have this kind of assistance when they're trying to raise children, because poverty has long-term, lasting detrimental effects on child outcomes as kids proceed into adulthood. Well, the child tax credit was and is a useful policy, but it was constructed in a way that over 20 million kids didn't get the full credit because it wasn't fully refundable. We can get into the details or the weeds if you want on how that worked. But the important part is that the American Rescue Plan makes the child tax credit fully refundable and increases the benefits more so for families with kids under 6, but also for families with kids from 6 to 17. And making it fully refundable and kicking up those benefits, along with the other measures that we've described, was calculated by the Columbia Child Poverty Center to reduce child poverty by 50%. So that would absolutely be a milestone accomplishment of the American Rescue Plan. The earning of tax credit is also expanded in the plan, particularly for childless adults. But before I start getting into too many lists here, let me just conclude by pointing out that the economic context with data from this very morning suggests the urgency of getting this plan into our economy. And the president and vice president and our legislative team are working as hard as they can to make this a reality so that we can finally deliver to American people, to communities, to those who have long been struggling with this pandemic, both in terms of its health and economic damages. We can finally deliver them the relief that they need to help them get to the other side of the crisis. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wow, there's a lot to cover there. We do have quite a few questions, so I'll just kind of make this the lightning round. Question 1, please explain how it makes any sense to use 2019 income tax returns as a cutoff point to decide now who should receive checks. After all, tens of millions of people either lost their jobs in 2020, worked only part-time, and business orders either temporarily shuttered their businesses.
Yeah, so this is a good question, and it's a known issue that we're well aware of. One of the things that, and Ellen and Debbie back me up on this, one of the things you have to be careful about is while negotiations are ongoing, I'm not going to start to get into that kind of negotiating from this webinar. That doesn't help anybody. What I can tell you is that is a very known and understood situation that the administration and the Congress are making sure that people can access the checks when they need, not just when they need them, but based on their income situation that dictates their need for them.
Okay, thank you. How will the plan help people experiencing homelessness? Will there be enough funding to transition people into more stable, permanent housing?
Yeah, a very important part of the plan is, as I mentioned, I mean, I think the first thing you want to do in this space is do everything you can to keep roofs over people's heads. But the homeless population is, of course, extremely vulnerable at a time like this. Not just, I mean, they're always vulnerable, but even more so now because of the increased risk of contracting and spreading the pandemic. The rescue plan provides $5 billion for homeless assistance and includes funding to purchase and convert hotels and motels and industries badly. Those obviously are industries that were badly harmed by the impact of the pandemic on people's travels and tourism plans, as well as public restrictions. So we try to take that problem and help make it a solution for the homelessness problem. I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, you're muted, Ellen.
I was muted. How could we possibly do a Zoom call without someone talking while they're muted? So Jared, what are your thoughts on economic triggers rather than like date certain to create a softer landing to some of the benefit boosts, and you mentioned SNAP, to avoid a benefit cliff? I know the president in his executive order mentioned looking into those, but what are your thoughts on what would be appropriate triggers to allow for softer landings?
You know, I think so just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, this is the idea where instead of having to come back to the drawing board and, you know, craft these plans that are responsive to changing economic conditions, you put in a set of rules or triggers that keep the relief going until they trigger off or something else triggers on. So if the unemployment rate comes down to a certain level, or if the pandemic itself is alleviated to the point where you need less help. I think that this makes a lot of economic sense. It has a lot of support among the economics community. Many of the folks who've thought about this are actually even in the administration now, so continued work will occur on this. I think the important thing is to recognize in the context of the American Rescue Plan that we are in the midst of really what has been a national emergency. The president has talked about this as being on war footing against a very tricky and fatal in many cases enemy. So this is not the moment to be deliberating and taking weeks to try to figure out the best way to trigger things on and off. We have to get relief out there now. I think longer term, this is a great and important area of economic and policy research, and should become part of our policy landscape.
So I'm leaving the longest question for last because it encompasses quite a bit of the territory you covered. Here goes. In the development of the subsequent infrastructure recovery package, what is the likelihood of the package including significant systemic changes about key human needs that would help low-income households beyond the immediate COVID emergency, such as in housing, going beyond emergency rental assistance and moving towards making low-income rental voucher programs more like entitlements than underfunded appropriations? Hunger, making current 15% benefit boost in SNAP. And
Yeah, I get it.
so you get the gist of this.
Let me answer that. That is very much the way President Biden thinks about what we're trying to do here. Simply getting to the other side of the crisis. I shouldn't say it's simple because it's hard, and it's a $1.9 trillion plan that's going to take us there. Getting to the other side of the crisis, however, is not enough. That's part of the that's an essential. What do they say? They say in economics, necessary but not sufficient. It's absolutely necessary, of course, to control the virus, to distribute the vaccine, to provide relief to families and communities, especially to the vulnerable communities I've talked about in my comments today. But simply getting to the other side isn't enough. That bar is too low. We have to, as the president has said, build back better. And I interpret this question as asking, what are you going to do to build back better? The way an economist thinks about this is cyclical versus structural. Cyclical is recession, an economic shock like a pandemic. You have to deal with that time-sensitive shock as deliberately, as quickly, with as large as an intervention as is called for. Go big or go home is, I think, the way the president has talked about it. That gets you to the other side of the crisis, but then you're still dealing with clean energy shortfalls, housing shortfalls, racial inequities, poverty, inequality, all the things the questioner was talking about. That's the recovery plan. And that plan is still being formed. It's lots of discussions and meetings, interactions with the Hill, but that's where many of the elements that the questioner raised will be dealt with. I was talking this morning on a different discussion about helping people move from industries that are contracting to industries that are expanding. That's going to take educational opportunities, helping people helping people afford higher education. That's key there. The kinds of healthcare interventions the president talked about in housing, sure. I think, and I come again, it's my center on budget roots. We did a lot of work on the importance of vouchers and expanding them and expanding the kinds of neighborhoods where vouchers can be used. That's whether that's a Recovery Act or a budgetary issue, some of these things are kind of intertwined. We will have to see, but that's very much the kind of structural issue. By the way, when you talk about housing, the other structural issue, exclusionary zoning. That is something the president has been talking about, doing everything we can to try to open up and push back on since his campaign under the racial equity agenda, making sure that entrepreneurs and women and people of color have access to capital markets that they haven't had enough of in the past. That's another way to promote racial equity. So I think that the spirit of the rescue plan, as I've talked about, is very much in terms of rescue, getting folks to the other side. The spirit of recovery is to recognize that it is unacceptable to this president and vice president to have an economic recovery where GDP growth, overall economic growth or stock market growth is a spectator sport. People in the bottom half can watch it, but they can't participate. No, that is an unacceptable economic model. And I think reforming that model so that everyone gets a fair shake at the kinds of prosperity that this administration envisions for them, that's key to the recovery or building back better stage of the agenda.
Wow. The questions in the queue just represent the gamut of programs that are included in the plan. Just to tick off some items, just so you know, Jared, there were many questions about the minimum wage and making that makes it in the final. Benefits for undocumented people, vaccines, adults with disabilities, college students, TANF, state and local fiscal relief, paid sick leave, just to name a few. So in your remaining minute, is there anything you just want to say to capture some of those?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would take a long time. So let me see what I guess what I would say is I did speak a little bit about the efforts to make sure that the vaccines are more equitably distributed. And though that's part of the American Rescue Plan. Especially if I've talked to both the president and the vice president about this. This is a huge value. They recognize we don't have the kind of inclusive, racially equitable economic recovery until we fix that part of the problem. That is clear. And that's very much part of the plan. Minimum wage, yes. I mean, the president has stuck by getting to 15. If you talk to him about this, you recognize that he's deeply committed to it. And I guess one of the things that's gotten under my skin a bit, because I've worked in this area of minimum wage for a long time, is when I debate people who say, the minimum wage has nothing to do with the virus or the pandemic. You're just tacking it on to the rescue plan. That is just, this is a family show, so I won't say what that is, but that's wrong. If you look at how many millions of essential workers, whether it's sanitation workers, fulfillment workers in warehouses, and people in the healthcare sector, many of whom are putting jabs in arms, as they say in the UK, you will find people whose wages in some places are much too close to the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. So please don't tell me that a minimum wage of $15 an hour is somehow unrelated to the hardships caused by this pandemic on working people, many of whom are our most essential workers who make nothing near a living wage. President Biden plans to do something about that, and he will not be pushed back on that plan.
Thank you so much. We know how crazy your day is, and just that you continue to come back and give us keen insights. Just want you to know how much we really appreciate it. So hope you find time to play your double bass at some point.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Now we're going to slide into the next segment of our program, and we are again delighted to have Dr. Falusi and Dr. Kaskin with us today. So we heard a lot about the economic and programmatic and policy implications of the Biden rescue plan. As Debbie Frank from Children's Health Watch likes to say, you both have your hands on the bellies of the babes, and in some cases, young children. Can you give us, in your own experience, some of the things that you've seen with your patients in putting a face on the economic and health and stress that you see among your patients as they try to cope with the impacts, the devastating impacts of COVID? Dr. Kaskin, we'll start with you.
Sure, and thank you for having us. And I just want to thank Jared for his presentation as well. Appreciate him taking the time to talk through the contents of the bill. I think the way I think about our families and what they're facing, particularly during this pandemic, is I think about it as the game of Jenga, the blocks that you build it up, and then you take away a block, take away a block, take away a block, and see when does it eventually just collapse. Because all the things that we talk about with the social determinants of health, all the things that are included in this bill trying to shore things up are things that really can have a ripple effect on a family unit. So any one of these things that we've talked about, whether it's housing or nutritional support or public benefits, all these things, if you take a hit in one area, it affects the whole family system. So that's really kind of what we've seen have been, anywhere from families who are carrying on and doing their best with what they have to work with and educating kids at home virtually and trying to make the most of it and staying healthy somehow. And then we've seen families who are just take devastating hit after devastating hit, where we had a family where mom was hospitalized in the ICU and intubated with COVID. And while she was in the hospital, her husband passed away. And when she was discharged, she had an oxygen tank and couldn't go home and live with her relatives because they were smokers, and she had an oxygen tank. And she wound up getting a spot in a homeless shelter that was a walk up, and she has an oxygen tank. She cannot walk up the stairs. So it was just literally on and on and on with the challenges that she was facing. And, I think we all tend to think of it in a very limited way. COVID, hospitalization, you're sick, that's too bad. But for this woman, it just goes on and on and on and on. So that's kind of the way it affects our families.
Dr. Falusi, in your practice, what are you seeing? And is there a specific patient that comes to mind when you're thinking of all these pressures that are the result of COVID?
Right. So again, I echo Dr. Caston's appreciation. Thank you for having us, and certainly to Jared Bernstein for his expertise with the COVID bill and all of the work that's gone into it so far. I would say, children and families they're really bearing the brunt of the pandemic, and I think in ways that are not adequately publicized. So I really appreciate this opportunity that CHN has put together. All of those things that we've discussed, nutrition, housing, are issues that I'm seeing in my patients and families. What rises to the top for me most often is mental health. It's something that I've been very concerned about. We certainly know that there are children and adolescents who have had underlying depression or anxiety or have experienced trauma that have become at higher risk for those during the pandemic. But I'm also seeing kids who, recently I saw a 14-year-old girl who was straight A student, very, had, great resiliency, had really good support in her family, came in for a well visit. And then as part of the typical visit, we politely ask the parents to leave the room so we can have a candid conversation and confidential conversation with the adolescent. And she told me that she'd been seriously thinking about ending her own life. Something that it was not my first time seeing her. I would never have imagined that a year prior. And a lot of it stemmed from not being in school, missing her friends, loss of routines. They had a family member or two who'd been hospitalized with COVID. So now she had more anxiety around other family members contracting COVID and becoming ill. There's isolation, there's grief that even our youngest children are experiencing and exhibiting signs of. And that's, sort of how they're feeling directly. And then there's parental stress that also gets, that children pick up on or that affect the parents and makes it more difficult for them to be able to provide support. We know that children, even as they're experiencing trauma, they are able to be resilient with the help of strong, supportive, loving relationships with adult caregivers. But when our adult caregivers have lost their jobs, when they have become ill, when they have, long-term, physical fatigue and pain from COVID, when they don't know where their next meal is coming from, it makes it very difficult for them to support their children. So the list goes on and on for me, I feel like, but that's a lot of it comes back to mental health and the things that we really need to do to support families in this time. Again, school closures, the physical health, nutrition, all of those are really key. And I agree with Dr. Kaskin in that they're all very intertwined as well. So it's important, I think, with any bill or with any advocacy efforts that we're really talking about all of these issues together and not in isolation.
And thank you so much for mentioning that. In the Q&A, we there are quite a few comments about mental health, anxiety, and depression, in addition to the the more physical components of dealing with COVID. So thank you for mentioning that. So a lot of us talk about the fact that COVID just literally ripped the Band-Aid off of what was already an underlying disparities in healthcare, nutrition, education in our country. And there's this effort to, it was mentioned earlier with Jared, to sort of do some temporary fixes to try to deal with the containment of the elevated need during COVID. But once the health pandemic is beyond us, we still have to deal with so many of these underlying issues. And if you both had to identify programs right now that have responded very well to not just the COVID needs, but the underlying needs, what would you recommend that we try to really work to make a more permanent solution? Which programs would you identify?
So I can start with that. Some of the things that we've seen over the past year that I would want to continue, all of the nutrition support and even more. Jared spoke about SNAP support, WIC for our younger babies and pregnant women. And as schools reopen, more support for school nutrition. I've definitely seen an increase in food insecurity and in obesity, because those two issues are linked. I've seen, we screen for food insecurity in our clinics, and typically I'll see about 10 to 20% of families screening positive, which even that we feel like is underreporting. And now more than half of families are endorsing that they're experiencing food insecurity. And some of that is, again, schools being closed and families not having access to school meals, or there is access, but it requires transportation to drive to the school to pick up the week's worth of food. And there may be other barriers for them. So I'd certainly say nutrition supports. The efforts happening now around securing our schools, I think, need to be permanent. A lot of discussion around how to make sure that ventilation, that other factors in terms of making sure our schools are safely opened are things that we'll need to continue. This will not be our last pandemic, and I think having those things in place will support families going forward, so that, again, children are not out of school for a year before we're able to recover and get them back into their routines. The public health efforts being put now around vaccinations, I think, will be important. As pediatricians, this is what we talk about day in, day out, about vaccines and the importance of vaccinations, and making sure all people have access is key. So if there is a silver lining, maybe some of that is increased discussion around how to ensure that vaccination or vaccine access is equitable for everyone, and having those efforts be permanent, I think, will be really important.
Dr. Kaskin.
Yeah, I would agree on all those topics. And I think I would add that the response that we saw from really private groups and nonprofits as well, that were able to support families around hunger insecurity. The restaurant industry really pivoted to step in and fill the void for some of our families that are struggling the most, with really innovative programs. That was really impressive. And I hope that there's a way for that to continue beyond the pandemic. Some of our young, more entrepreneurial folks who tried to tie, excess food. In this country, we have this crazy problem where we throw away so much usable food, and so there were a lot of young people who were bridging that gap and finding where the food was about to be thrown away and how to get it to people who could use it. So I think if we can continue some of those programs, they will continue to have benefits into the future. I think as well, the way we were able to pivot to telehealth, whether it was for mental health, primary care, almost every aspect of healthcare had to really rely on telehealth. So I think anything that we can do to make that sustainable, financially sustainable, so that physicians can bill for those services and continue to incorporate those into the old way of doing medicine. I think it's a change that was long overdue, and maybe the pandemic really precipitated that change. But it's a good change, and it's something that we want to be able to continue to utilize into the future. And I think as well, the use of virtual learning, which we know for some families has been absolutely not feasible for so many of our families. But there is a small group of kids who actually have done better with virtual learning. So being able to have our school systems kind of look at what they can do to benefit every kid and meet every kid where they are, so that they can enhance their learning as best as possible.
Thank you. You both mentioned silver linings, and those of us in the food and nutrition world, we were able very early on to get in legislation the pandemic EBT program, where children who are not able to get their breakfast and lunch and snack at school have been given an EBT card where they can go to their local grocery store, farmer's market, wherever they can use an EBT card and purchase the meals that the children would have gotten in school. Many of us know that, children have winter breaks, spring breaks, and the long summer break. And we've been trying to get an EBT system in. And here we've got all 50 states, DC, the territories now operating pandemic EBT. And so our hope is moving forward, again, ripping that Band-Aid off, that we can take care of kids even when we're not in a pandemic situation. The only other thing I wanted to mention that was raised in the Q&A, and we've seen also, is the technology lapses. WIC went remote, but if you don't have broadband and you don't have internet access, you were not able to access that program. And so again, moving forward, looking at the technology needs, especially in low-income communities, rural communities, isolated communities, that becomes a big issue. Last question, and those of us on this call who are used to advocacy training often talk about the elevator pitch. That is, if you run into a legislator in an elevator and you've got 45 to 60 seconds to make your pitch, what would you say to that legislator? If you ran into President Biden in an elevator and you had 45 to 60 seconds to get out your pitch as physicians, what would you say to them? I'll start with Dr. Kaskin this time.
Yeah, I think as I think through the different issues, as I said, with the sort of Jenga blocks, that any one that you pull out could really have a catastrophic effect. I think what really is going to benefit our families is to get barriers out of the way for whatever sort of supports and benefits that you're talking about. The bureaucratic piece often is what really challenges our families. The families who are eligible for things and they just can't seem to connect the pieces and make it work. So for something like the housing support and rental relief, yes, that's very important and very necessary, and we have to have it, but we also have to make it really easy for families to get that, because when those eviction moratoriums hit, there are going to be families on the street who, if they can't figure out how to get that rental relief. So making it as direct as possible, whether it's providing relief to property owners as opposed to having to give the money to the renter who then has to give it to the landlord, give that money straight to the landlord so that they can then forgive the rent on the renters who are behind. So whatever it takes to make that relief immediate and direct to families, whether it's housing, nutrition, mental health, all of those things, our families need to be able to access it directly and quickly.
Dr. Falusi, your 45 to 60-second pitch to the president.
I think first I would say thank you, because the COVID relief bill as it currently is does include much of my wish list for families. Certainly first, economic relief, unemployment and housing support, the increased child tax credit, increased funding for SNAP and other nutrition assistance that we need to make permanent. Recovery checks for each individual. And unlike some of the bills last year, I know the last one that passed at the end of the year did include this, but including all immigrant families, whether they have documented or undocumented individuals in the family. Second, healthcare access with the focus on mental health, as I mentioned, and continuing to ramp up the access to vaccinations when it comes to healthcare access. And then third, support for schools. You know, the sooner that we can reopen schools, the sooner children have those supports that they've depended on. And as long as we're doing it safely, that is something that helps not just the children, but parents also who have, many of whom have left their jobs to be able to care for their kids at home with distance learning. And I think the last thing I would say is that the fact that the pandemic has affected people so disparately based on race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status is just completely unacceptable. So I would plead that we are deliberate and stay really laser focused on equity in these efforts, and not expecting that, you know, a rising tide will raise all boats, but rather be very deliberate in ensuring that we're achieving equity.
Wow. Thank you both so much. You just hit on so many of the issues that were raised in the Q&A and also in all of our meetings. So we really appreciate your wisdom and the services that you provide in your communities, and we are grateful. And again, thank you so much for joining us. And now with our marching orders is Deb Weinstein.
Well, thank you very much. Nikolai, if you can share my slides. Right, I'm trying not to use the most technical language here. You've heard about why this is also important for real people, as we've just been hearing, and thanks so much for our physicians, and for the whole economy, as Jared was describing. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to rip through this. Okay, so this I've used once before and described as the worst slide ever. So I don't have it up here to expect you to read all of this fine print, but just to illustrate that there is so much in this legislation that's going before Congress, that is before Congress, that we will send you resources that, including this slide, but so that you can understand more about what's at stake here, how much that's in this bill that would do a lot of good. Not everything that people have very rightly raised in the Q&A, but an awful lot. So go on to the next one, Nikolai, thanks. So, okay, so what's going on in Congress? It starts with some things that have already happened. The House committees have passed what they call reconciliation bills. And, you know, there could be a long discussion of what's reconciliation. It does not mean everybody comes together and it's kumbaya time. It is a particular mechanism that enables bills to pass the Senate with a simple majority. That's really the key point here. Okay, so they've done that. During the week we're in right now, all those bills are being put together by the House Budget Committee into one big fat bill. That's the $1.9 trillion bill. And in fact, the key element here is that the committees had to keep within their own subtotals, so it all added up to no more than that. So the House is working on pulling that together. We had thought they might do it by tomorrow, but we think it'll probably be Monday that they'll release the bill. It will then go to the Rules Committee and then to the floor probably by Friday of next week. That's key. So then the next really critical part is Senate action will start on the week of March 1st. And there they will not do their own separate set of bills, but they will look to see how they can put forth the House version in what they call, in their own bill. Here's where the reconciliation limits kick in. In order to do this bill that will only take a majority instead of needing 60 votes, you see this term bird bath, that's named after Senator Robert Byrd from past years. And they are a set of rules about what can fit in and what can't fit in. And they'll have to sort of put the legislation through that. I'll tell you a little more about what's controversial in that area. And in that way, some differences may start to emerge between what the House passed and what the Senate is looking at. Then they can have 20 hours of debate, no more, except that they can keep offering amendments. That's this vote-a-rama thing. And those amendments will, again, if they do pass, they will further change the bill from what was in the House. So during the week of March 8th, and you see a big question mark, because this is what we hope will happen, they no later than this, that they'll resolve differences between the House and Senate. And so that the Senate will have to vote on it, and it'll have to go back to the House so that both the House and Senate have voted in favor of exactly the same thing. You know, what's key here, see written in red, March 14th is the day that the current enhanced unemployment benefits expire. We need the extension of those benefits. We can't have an interruption. So that Congress knows they've got to get this done as soon as possible before that deadline. Nikolai can go on to the next one. So there are uncertainties in all of this. The first, if you look on the to the right, the $1.9 trillion, that's as much money as they can spend in this. You can increase the deficit by that amount of money. So the uncertainties are, if somebody wants to increase the cost of something, how do you pay for that and still stay within the $1.9 trillion? The other thing on the right-hand side, the 50+1, well, that's how many they'll need to pass this. And as you no doubt have heard, the 50 most likely has to be each and every Democratic senator, because so far we do not have assurances or even too many guesses that there would be Republicans who would vote for it. So you can't lose a single Democratic senator and then the tie is broken by Vice President Harris and it can pass. But it isn't clear that we have every single Democratic senator. The minimum wage increase is one of those areas where Senator Manchin of West Virginia, Senator Sinema of Arizona have expressed hesitation or even opposition to a $15 minimum wage increase. But could be a lot of discussion about how it phases in or different questions. So that's not clear. The other question around uncertainty about the minimum wage, You see, I have the little picture of the bird bath. That it's possible that the minimum wage would be judged not germane, not allowed to be in this package, although a lot of people have been making the case that it absolutely has a budgetary impact and therefore should be included. Well, that's an uncertainty where you are needed to weigh in to fight for an increase in the minimum wage. Similarly, Medicaid funding. There are pieces in this that provide additional incentives for states to expand Medicaid. We know there are advocates working in southern states to get more expansions, very important. Home and community-based services to help people with disabilities and seniors to stay in their homes. There are increased funding for that. But there's also questions about it. There's funding potentially to allow that to happen in terms of having drug companies pay higher rebates than they now do. That is something that the drug companies no doubt don't want to have to pay more. So there is another one of these questions. We need to weigh in, say, you've got to protect this additional funding in the Medicaid program. Other health too, but I'm just trying to rip through some of the examples. State, local education aid, these are critically important areas. You heard from Dr. Kaskin and Dr. Falusi about how important the education money is. And we need that money, and yet there's been opposition to it. So again, we have to weigh in and say, don't mess with that. Highly important, the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit. You heard Jared talk about how this is going to cut child poverty in half. You know, it's for a year. We've got to pass it and then keep it. And we can't take it for granted because it's so important. There's controversies about those direct payments. Would there be an attempt to have fewer people get it? We're trying to make sure that people who don't all have social security numbers can get that assistance. So that's one of the controversies, one of the uncertainties. Unemployment benefits, extremely important. How long? Right now, the bill is written to only extend the benefits through the end of August. That's a really bad timing because Congress is on recess then. You don't want to have the unemployment benefits expiring without a ready opportunity to extend them. So we're trying to get that extended to September and end of September, another month. Paid leave in the bill right now is not mandatory. It gives incentives to employers to provide it. That isn't as good as what we need. So that's another controversy. And I just read that the $5 billion that would be new assistance to help people pay their heating and light and water bills is, being questioned. So these are all struggles here, and so that we have to weigh in. Nikolai, please go to the next slide. Here's one example, one state, and it's not arbitrarily selected. Senators Sinema, Senator Kelly, new senators from Arizona. We want them to know that their constituents understand that more than 100,000 jobs were lost in Arizona, that 15% of adults living with children said that in the past week they didn't have enough to eat all the time. And in interest of time, I won't go through all of these, but these are state-specific, Arizona-specific hardships, people who really need this help, and the solutions for Arizona. Arizona will get $492 million in emergency rental assistance. will get $7.4 billion in state and local aid. All of these hundreds of thousands of children, or actually 1.5 million children, will be benefited by the increase in the child tax credit. We need to make sure, here's this one example, but that members of Congress, particularly senators all around the nation, hear from their constituents about how important this is. So as these negotiations are going on, they say to themselves, well, you can't mess with this. We've got to protect this. To the next slide, please. So we've got a couple of ways that you can weigh in where we try to make it easy. Here's an example. All of this will be provided in a follow-up email. If you go to our website, as it says up there, chn.org, see the green arrow, click on Take Action. It'll take you to an emailable letter that'll go to your 2 senators and your rep. And this particular one is all about the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit for all the help that that provides. And then if you go to the next one, here's a graphic about next Monday. There'll be a tweet storm and a call-in day next Monday. We will send you much more information about it, but we hope you'll all participate. If you're not a tweeter, you can use the phone. But in particular, we hope you'll spread the word about this because this too is a way of having every member of Congress know that, and I believe the call-in day is specifically targeted the House because next week is when the House will take action. We've got to make sure we pull out the stops that all of this happens. So you can go on to the final slide. So thank you for all that you have done. We've already collected about 45,000 letters, are not collected, but people send on the child tax credit and earned income tax credit emailable letter that I mentioned. Before that, we had a previous one with about, what was it, 180,000 letters that were sent, but we need more because, you know, enacting this bill will be the most important convergence of need and solutions that I've ever seen in my professional life. We need to win it and build on it. So thank you for the help you can give.
I'd like to thank all of our presenters. And as we mentioned at the top of the hour, please stay on for the survey that will be populating your screen in a second. Stay tuned for the next in what will be a series of webinars as we move from rescue to recovery. So thanks again, and thank you for supporting the Coalition on Human Needs. Have a good afternoon.